Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Positive Planet webinar, where we'll be discussing the 2026 Sustainability Reporting Landscape. Before we jump into anything, just a bit of housekeeping. A quick reminder that you'll need to unmute your device after joining so that you can hear the webinar speakers. So please make sure that you've done that. And if you have any problems, there is the chat function at the side. So please do message us. Drop any questions that you have into that comments section as well as we're going. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can, either in the chat or at the end of the session. But we do need to close quite promptly at 1 p.m. today if we can. So if we don't get to your message or your question, then we'll get back to you afterwards if that's okay. Today's session is being recorded, so you'll be able to revisit that later or share it with your colleagues. It will be a YouTube link that will be sent to you afterwards, as well as the slides in a follow-up email. So with all of that housekeeping out of the way, I'll quickly introduce who we are for those of you who are new to us. We're Positive Planet, a small team helping businesses turn sustainability goals into real impact. So we do everything from emissions measurement, policy updates to ESG guidance and accredited training like carbon literacy training. We really focus on providing practical support tailored to our clients as much as we can. So we're really focusing on what's important to you. Today you have myself, Bryony Salter, the head of sustainability here, and Emma Gray, our principal ESG consultant, who'll be leading the majority of today's webinar. So Emma, over to you.
Thanks, Bryony. Thank you everyone for joining. As Bryony mentioned, my name's Emma. I'm principal ESG consultant here at Positive Planet. I've been working here for about 10 months or so, leading the ESG team. Prior to here, I was working for another consultancy for 3 years in their UK ESG strategy and mandatory reporting team. So with that, let's just get started. It'd be great if you could drop into the chat and just tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're hoping to get out of this session. Is it maybe just compliance information or maybe just a sneak peek at our trend predictions? And as Bryony mentioned, hopefully we can answer this live or we'll send you more information, or we can create more content on the topics that you're listing. So yeah, it just helps us form the basis of future webinars. So let's start with challenges. So we recently surveyed around 80 of our clients to really understand and get more of an insight into the marketplace. What we wanted to do is have some real original data on what challenges our clients are facing, plus what they're planning to do in the sustainability landscape during 2026. And these insights have been reinforced by published research from other consultancies, regulators, other sustainability bodies. So to start with, let's hear more about the challenges the market is facing right now, and those top 3 challenges being supply chain, traceability, and engagement. So this was the most frequently cited challenge in actually improving supplier engagement and traceability across value chains. So as Scope 3 emissions reporting, due diligence requirements and trade-related regulations expand, limited visibility into supplier practices really presents a real significant compliance and reputational risk. So ultimately, strengthening those supplier relationships and investing in those traceability systems will be essential. We've got rising costs with compliance and sustainability regulation at 20% again. So fast evolving sustainability regulation is placing such a high and increasing cost on and resource pressure on organisations. So from CSRD to national disclosure regimes and environmental taxes, businesses are really seeking more of an integrated governance structures and approach and efficient reporting processes to manage complexity. I've seen this firsthand. I've worked with corporates across Europe who was just spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on CSRD compliance. So it's such a big challenge at the moment, which is now starting to trickle down into mid-cap and smaller businesses as well. And finally, adapting to policy change and new ESG climate disclosure requirements. This is around 16%. So there's been a real uncertainty around government policy and the pace of regulatory change. And the pace of this change actually really continues to challenge businesses. So respondents expect additional disclosure obligations, the stricter expectations around data accuracy, plus this accelerating need for really robust internal controls and accountability on that data. So while these three were the biggest, we also noticed some other common challenges, including driving sustainable growth in new markets, a talent and skill shortage in sustainability roles, and greenwashing and reputational risk. So as we can see, these challenges are all influenced by or speak directly to sustainability reporting. So with that, let's kick off into the main trends in 2026 on reporting. So trend one, the move towards ISSB style reporting. So the ISSB is formed under the IFRS Foundation, who have developed global baseline standards for sustainability related financial reporting. And so this really focuses on sustainability and climate related risk and opportunity. The ISSB, it stands for the International Sustainability Standards Board, sets global standards for sustainability disclosures, ultimately aimed at investors and designed to sit alongside financial reporting, ultimately making sustainability information more comparable and decision useful. So this wider move to ISSB style reporting is being driven by the regulators and capital markets who are looking for that consistent audit-ready reporting across all countries. So the key trend here is that companies will be moving away from reporting sustainability information and financial information in silos, and instead those two reporting mechanisms will start to merge together. But what does this actually look like in the UK? So the UK SRS, the Sustainability Reporting Standards, are the UK's proposed sustainability disclosure standards designed to endorse and implement the ISSB global baseline in the UK. So the first standards are S1, and that's general sustainability related financial disclosures, and S2, which is climate related disclosures. And these are based on the IFRS S1 and S2 with some minor UK amendments. So S1, the scope here is really around disclosures on all sustainability related risk and opportunities that could reasonably affect enterprise value. So this is things like cash flow, access to finance, cost of capital. And the structure here, it follows the TCFD style. So you've got a framework based around governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And this is applied across all sustainability topics, not just climate. However, then you do have S2, and this is your disclosures on climate-related risk and opportunities, again, through that enterprise value lens, again, following that structure of TCFD, but specifically for climate. So ultimately, these standards are intended to underpin the UK's future corporate sustainability disclosure regime, so investors can get that consistent decision useful information, all linked back to enterprise value. And the UK SRS, it has adopted the ISSB with some amendments for UK reporting companies. It will be hitting large and listed companies first, but ultimately may trickle down to smaller companies from there. And while those two, as I mentioned, are very closely aligned, the main difference here is that the ISSB is for global use, whereas the UK SRS has been amended for UK reporting companies. It's in its later stages at the moment, so it's not quite been finalised yet. It was going through draft consultation at the end of last year. When it does come in to be mandated, as mentioned, big companies first, but we're still waiting on those thresholds to be defined. So just to be really clear, ISSB global baseline, UK SRS domestic adoption of the ISSB. Okay, and in Europe, trend 2, EU reporting. So anyone who's keeping up to date with changes in European reporting, particularly the CSRD, CSDDD, and EU taxonomy, will know it was in complete chaos last year. I spent so much of the year just trying to work out what was going on. Those scope thresholds were changing. There was confusion around the requirements. There was pushback from European leaders, all eventually culminating in the EU omnibus. So the requirements have been simplified. The thresholds for inclusion have increased. But with less companies in scope, there is still this trickle down to smaller companies who are supplying into the EU. So even if you're a UK-based business that isn't in scope for this regulation, you may still feel its effects in increased data requests from your customers if they're in the EU and if they are falling into scope. So even with delays and this narrowed scope, EU in-scope customers will keep sending those supplier questionnaires. They'll be asking you for data on emissions, workforce, ethics, supply chain due diligence, probably with more of a focus on the larger entities first and risk hotspots rather than blanket data asks, which it would have once been. And when it comes to data, we are seeing a shift towards audit-ready data. So sustainability data is moving away from being maybe a marketing asset to more of a finance-grade asset. So a few years ago, many organizations could get by with badge-grade sustainability information. So maybe enough to satisfy a customer questionnaire, win a medal, get a label, potentially publish a credible-looking impact story. But we're entering into this audit-ready era where sustainability disclosures are expected to be consistent, evidence, controlled, reconcilable, much like financial reporting. It's not that badge grade data was ever bad. It's often exactly what organizations kind of needed at that time. Often would look like maybe a handful of KPIs tracked in a spreadsheet, reliance on estimations and one-off calculations. Potentially evidence was scattered across teams. The problem is it doesn't stand up well when stakeholders start asking questions around, show me the source of that data, who approved this methodology, can we assure this? And even where limited assurance isn't legally mandated, the market expectation is moving towards this auditability. So documented methodologies, data lineage, internal controls, and consistent boundaries. It's already happening in place, particularly with large companies. But again, we're expecting to see those mid-caps and SMEs following suit when it comes to managing their data. Right, I pass to you, Bryony, on scope 3.
Yeah, so scope 3 is a really big one for us, particularly at Positive Planet. But for many organisations, scope 3 measurements, and that is everything across your wider value chain that you maybe don't have sort of direct control over. It's not been a requirement until more recently. So as Emma mentioned earlier, we're seeing voluntary reporting move to mandatory under ISSB, but more specifically for things like carbon reporting. Scope 3 requirements are becoming stricter across a range of areas, really, but public sector contracts, so the likes of NHS contracts, they're now encouraging suppliers to measure all of their scope 3 global emissions and product emissions to level up their evergreen sustainable supplier assessment. We're getting sort of broader disclosure requests through the likes of CDP or EcoVadis. And for the likes of SBTI, the Science Based Targets Initiative, or B Corp assessments, those requests for sort of those broader emissions are also increasing. And even if you aren't getting these direct requests, if you supply to anyone within these sort of sectors, these areas, then the chances are that the requests will filter down to you over time. And we're seeing that across the board with our clients. Relying on spend data often isn't sufficient for scope 3 anymore either. So we have investors, customers, potentially other stakeholders increasingly expecting transparency on data sources and an improvement in quality. So really moving from that spend data into engaging with suppliers, understanding what those specific emissions are, rather than relying on a sort of estimated spend-based data quality. And that shift to understand and improve scope 3 impacts more means that we're now seeing more businesses needing or wanting to develop supplier engagement plans, engaging with their customers more, or maybe measuring the full life cycle impacts of their products, potentially services as well, to properly inform their sustainability initiatives. So there's a whole host of things going on in scope 3, but really we are seeing this as a major trend all throughout last year, but more requests this year as well in understanding those emissions. We're seeing more requests via our clients that have come in from their own customers, requesting this sort of information. We have a little bit of information on regulations by industry, but I'm not going to go into too much detail on these. More just for reference, if you are in any of these particular sectors, then you're likely to see more of these regulations in 2026. And if you haven't already, you will be required to start complying with those. If you do have any questions at all about any of that, please do get in contact with us and we can go through those specifics for your industry and your business. We will be doing some future sessions on some of these topics as well, so look out for those. And then more sort of those emerging trends, the things that we're seeing coming down the line. We're going to continue to see ESG and sustainability influence investment and tendering decisions more and more. As I said, there are the likes of the NHS that are increasingly being at the forefront of some of that in the public sector. But investors as well, there are stricter regulatory reasons for them to need to improve their Scope 3 emissions data, which is then filtering down to a lot of the organisations that we end up working with. There's a growing move towards businesses measuring the impact on nature and biodiversity as well. So we have the likes of the TNFD, that's the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And that's the sort of cousin of TCFD, which is more broadly that climate and has a large portion of that is looking at emissions. So we've got the TNFD and we have the SBTN as well, which is a science-based targets network. But again, that's the sort of closely associated to the SBTI, which is the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which again looks more at that climate side of things and the emission side of things, whereas this is starting to focus on nature and biodiversity. But certainly from our perspective as an organisation, I think this really could disrupt the market quite a lot over the next few years and bring about more meaningful change potentially as businesses work towards positively impacting nature, biodiversity. But there's something sort of more tangible about those things than there is when we're thinking about carbon emissions, for example. We can sort of touch and feel nature, biodiversity. So really feel like that is going to bring about a huge amount of change and meaningful change over the next few years. Greenwashing controls. So those will likely continue to strengthen over the next few years, and businesses will need to embed greenwashing controls within their operations. And although the EU Green Claims Directive was suspended in 2025, we do expect that to come back in some form, hopefully this year, to sort of tackle some of that greenwashing, but without the administrative burden on particularly smaller businesses. And then CBAM, that was briefly mentioned a couple of times before, but again, we're seeing a lot more requests on CBAM from our clients, but it's focused on those heavy emission industries like metals, cement, and is all about taxing emissions intensive imports into the EU and later the UK to incentivise domestic trade and manufacturing. So the EU CBAM became fully active this month, and then the UK CBAM starts in January of next year, 2027. So we'll see a lot more of that filtering down supply chains as well.
Nice. Great, thanks, Bryony. So what all this means for 2026. So the overarching theme is clear. Sustainability in 2026 will be shaped by transparency, accountability, and capability. External regulatory pressures are converging with these internal readiness gaps as well, making early preparation a competitive advantage rather than a compliance exercise. So try and see it as a business value tool rather than just sort of like a tick box exercise. So what should you do next? So in terms of what this might mean for you as a business, so SMEs, you could expect more data requests coming down the line from your customers, start to think about how to collect this data more accurately. Collecting evidence for your data as well is really important as that audit grade scrutiny becomes more intense. And finally, a larger weighting of ESG in tenders as well. So we're tending to see companies being asked for ESG progress or metrics, and actually this ESG within tender process has got more prominence, there's more expectations, it's actually harder to win work without it. Corporates, on the other side, is pretty much everything from SMEs or anything from before, but with increased regulatory pressure. So there's more regs coming down the line that may impact your whole business, such as reporting to the UK SRS, or hitting operational parts of your organization like packaging or commodity sourcing. Again, audit grade data expectations, as mentioned before. There's nowhere really for like poor sustainability data to hide anymore. Data needs to be accurate. It needs to have the evidence behind it to support it. It needs to be held securely. It needs to meet those really robust data audit expectations. And then finally, greenwashing risk. So as Bryony's already mentioned, there's a lot changing in this space at the moment. Plus, inaccurate sustainability data can make you more susceptible to risk, particularly greenwashing risk. And with the regs changing a lot at the moment, it's a really good time to work out your processes here. So all green claims should be evidenced by methodology. So start to think about your marketing and understand where there may be gaps. And in terms of how to prepare, so 5 key steps here. Number 1 being build an ISSB ready course. So have your governance controls, metric definitions and boundaries in place. Have a scope 3 materiality and data plan. So basically get ready for this kind of reporting, as it's going to be the norm, even if you're not in scope right now. Secondly, make your transition plan disclosure grade. So include levers, CapEx alignments, milestones and assumptions. Transition plans come up a lot in sustainability reporting, particularly to any third-party standards, frameworks and questionnaires. So it's best practice to make them super, super tight. Get your claim substantiation on rails. So make sure you've got evidence packs, approvals and consistent wording. Customers and regulators are getting wiser to green claims. So again, best to get the right things in place early doors. 4, start nature and biodiversity pilots. So where you've got a high dependency or impact, you might be in land, water, food, construction or finance. Nature and biodiversity is becoming so prominent in reporting. As Bryony mentioned, again, there's science-based targets for nature, there's the reporting framework through the TNFD. It feels like a lot of companies have emissions reporting on lockdown now. The processes are really repeatable. Everyone understands the value of doing it and improving and pushing progress year on year. And now kind of nature's set to become that next big thing for organizational sustainability reporting. And finally, scan for applicable regulations. So understand what you're in scope for now versus in the future. Start to map out the touch points within your business, assess any CBAM data needs if you're trading in covered goods. And we actually have a separate webinar specifically on this coming up in Feb. So, bit of a big question to end on. What does all of this mean for the future of reporting? So as we've talked about, there's a lot of reporting mechanisms out there. They're starting to blur as well more into one. So ultimately, this will end up being a really uniform reporting approach in the future. Currently, there's a lot of reporting frameworks, there's a lot of standards. They're all asking for the same or similar data at different points in the year. So we're expecting to see a consolidation between these requirements, just leaving one standardized reporting approach. Should make reporting more streamlined in the future, while making it easier for you as businesses as well to be able to benchmark your peers on their targets, actions and progress. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, research those regulations, see what's going to impact your business, work out what you should be complying with. If you want to book in a call with me, that is my meeting link via QR code. These slides will be shared, so don't worry about getting your phone out and trying to book it now. But yeah, I'm very happy to have any one-on-one chats with anyone. And I think we've got a bit of time for Q&A. So yeah, I've got about 5 minutes.
Yep, so we've had a few questions in, but please do drop anything in there that you might have as well. But we've got two here which are similar. So we've got Jackie Wall asking, how do the standards work alongside VSME recommendations? And Lucy Johnson asking, hi both, we're not eligible for mandatory reporting. What will happen for voluntary reporters?
Nice. So thanks, Jackie, for that question. That's a really great question. The SME standards is similar in a way to the ISSB. So by doing VSME, you're already looking at your sustainability linked risk and opportunity. So you've kind of done a lot of the legwork already. If you're already going down that VSME reporting route, absolutely continue going down there. It's built for SMEs. It's meant to be easier than something like the ISSB. It's also recognised by the EU Commission as well for sustainability reporting. So continue with that. And as you get more mature in a few years' time, you may then want to look at reporting voluntarily to the ISSB if you're not in scope yet. That second part of that question from Lucy Johnson, which is, we're not eligible for mandatory reporting, so what will happen to voluntary? To answer that, Lucy, pretty much everything that's already been covered. So even if you're not falling into scope, voluntary reporting is going the same way as mandatory. There'll be more financial aligned reporting, more audit grade data expectations, more interoperability. So the data will be structured in a way that serves multiple standards and frameworks. So I hope that helps.
Fabulous. Another one, what has happened to the TCFD?
TCFD it's disbanded. It's no longer. It's now been taken over by the ISSB. So many companies who are still reporting to the TCFD framework, that's completely fine. But it has been adopted by the ISSB standards. So there's loads of similarities between the two. In fact, I think 75% of the TCFD requirements are aligned to the S2 standards within ISSB, so that transfer will be super easy for any reporting companies.
Thanks, Emma. And then I think a final one, and maybe a more tricky one for us to answer, but Ian asks, CARMA focuses on the nature and biodiversity solutions. What audit level data is required between frameworks to support this impact?
Yeah, it's probably one for maybe both of us, but it's kind of everything we've spoken about. It's about when you're getting that audit level data, you need to be able to evidence it. So keeping track of any changes in the data, anything that's changed, why that's changed, holding that data really centrally in a secure location, having responsible owners within the business for who is actually able to manage the data. So that's the type of thing that auditors will be looking for. But Bryony, I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add there.
Yeah, just that it is quite a new space and something we've been keeping a close eye on over the last few years, particularly SBTN that we mentioned before and TNFD. We've gone through sort of a lot of amendments, updates over the last few years. And so it's sort of in that early stage still. But in terms of the data that people might need to be collecting, businesses might need to be collecting on that front, some of it is similar to what we would be doing for carbon accounting. And what we're going to be trying to do as an organisation is to find sort of an entry route for organisations measuring their impact on nature and biodiversity in a very similar way to what they do with carbon at the moment, before expanding into those broader requirements for SBTN and TNFD. But there are more geographical nuances with nature and biodiversity. There are in a lot of areas the need to include GIS data, so more spatial data, and it gets a little bit more complex. So it's one to watch, I think. There's no clear set answer on this yet from our perspective. We're trying to find an easy way to get our clients that we work with involved in that nature and biodiversity piece, and then expand into that sort of broader reporting.
Nice.
Fabulous. And I think we've got 30 seconds or so left, so that's pretty good for us. Thank you everyone for your questions today. I think we've covered everyone that was on there, but if you do want to ask anything else, obviously book in with Emma, or do feel free to send either of us an email to get in touch, or follow us on LinkedIn. We have another webinar coming up on the 11th of February. That's all to do with CBAN with Michael Kenyon. So if you are in those heavy carbon intensive industries, please do log on to that. There'll be heaps of information on there for you, and you can sign up using the QR code on the screen now. But thank you to everyone for attending, and thank you, Emma, for a great session. You can also view our 2026 Trends Report, which will be on the slides that we send afterwards. But I hope you have a good rest of your week, everybody.
Thank you.